to kind of fire up. And excellent. Well, welcome everyone to another LinkedIn Live and our account based Friday sessions that Megan and I host every Friday at the same time for about 30 minutes. And this week we've got a special guest, Jen Ross. We'll give a formal introduction in a moment. Each week we open up with a poll, and this week's poll was around customer marketing. It was a conversation that kind of spurred this poll that I had last week. I was having some discussions with some senior level marketers in New York City, and one of the conversations came up about customer marketing, like where does it fit? And so I figured it was a good idea to ask the people what they were seeing in terms of where does organizationally does it report into? Does it report into marketing? Does it report into CX or CS? And a large percentage of people said marketing. One key takeaway in the conversation that we were having was, regardless of where it fits in, there's a heavy cross-functional need for somebody to have skill sets to work across the organization in a customer marketing role. But I don't know, Megan, what was your take on this?
Yeah, I will pick marketing for the same reason that I would say marketing shouldn't report into sales, or it shouldn't report into product. Like, you want to have marketing as a discipline that is its own independent entity and allowed to provide its strategic advice and tactical execution to internal constituents, of which I'm delighted to see people talking about it in the context of helping customer success, because it's just such an opportunity that most companies don't take advantage of. But I would not want to see marketing reporting into CS or CX for that matter. I think there are sort of different disciplines. Now, depending on how expansive your definition of the CX function is, though, maybe like that I could make an argument for, depending on how you're positioning it. But for sure, I will pick marketing every time here. And just, I can't encourage organizations enough to make this part of their discipline. But Jen, delighted to get your thoughts on this. And thank you so much for joining us. And for those who don't know, Jennifer is CMO at Intensify, which is a revenue platform company, and she can tell us a little bit about it. But Jennifer and I also had the pleasure of working together for many years at Serious Decisions and at Forrester. And we're just really lucky to have her and her amazing background in advising senior revenue leaders in many, many companies who came to rely very much on you, Jen, I think, for your great advice and insights and strategy. So thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks, Megan and John. I'm delighted to be here today. And actually, your question is more timely than you realize, because I joined Intensify back in August. And for those of you that don't know, Intensify provides B2B organizations with the most accurate, comprehensive buyer intent intelligence in the market, and also solutions to act on that intelligence. It's a really exciting space. It was a tough decision for me to go from what I was doing. I had the dream job of advising B2B CMOs at companies like Sirius and then Forrester, but really excited to get back to a practitioner role. And I joined a company that we're just going into our fourth year now, so emerging growth, high growth year over year. And so we're building out the team. And I would have to say, Megan, I'm in violent agreement with customer marketing should be part of the marketing organization. And I'm also agreeing with John, what you said about the conversations you've had in New York, because we just hired a new head of customer success. She and I, from the first day, from the interview process and now on as part of her onboarding, we're meeting once a week. We're looking for opportunities to what are the best ways for us to cross-pollinate and make sure that our teams are tied at the hip and connected. But I think, Megan, what you said is true, is there still needs to be definition around roles and responsibilities and clear swim lanes, just the right interlocks and processes to keep those teams connected.
Very much so, but that's exciting. I'm glad you get to do that. And as you and I know, the data that we used to pull says the earlier you invest in customer success, customer marketing, a really intentional approach to the post-sale life cycle, the faster you grow. So that's I'm happy to hear you guys are able to make that investment at a point when it's likely to do some good.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things you mentioned is you've been in your role for, was it about 7 months now, you said?
A little less than that. So I started late August. So, we're still in that. I'm I'm out of the honeymoon stage, I think, of saying that I'm the new CMO there, but it's still relatively early. And, when I think about that, the first 4 to 5 months, it sounds like a really long time, but it flies by. It really flies by.
100%. I would love for you to talk a little bit about, when you joined the company, what things from your sort of past of advising marketing leaders did you do yourself? What were your first things on your first 30 days? What did they look like?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share. And let's be honest, you just said it, right? I think I might have had a little bit more of a head start in terms of knowing what I should be asking both during the interview process and even during the first 30 days from my background. Um, but the interesting thing was it's different, as you know, Megan, you and I did this together. When you are working with different companies and you're listening to all of the things that are working and not working, and you're creating these best practice approaches, it's different when you get back into that practitioner role. And I was really, really curious to test those things that we've been advising CMOs on. So I really went into it with that approach, seeing how it would play out for me. And I think, you won't hear me say anything earth shattering in terms of, well, what should you do as a CMO in your first 30 days? But what I'll try to do is tell you kind of a little bit more of, well, what were some of the nuances or the differences in my situation in this early 30 to 60-day period. First, I did what everybody else would tell you to do, which is you've got to do discovery. You want to spend the time, first of all, interviewing, doing discovery with the rest of the executive team. The other thing that I did in parallel, and Megan, you were a part of this, and I thank you so much for this, as well as the other CMOs that were willing to give up some time to chat with me about it. Because I was coming back into a practitioner role, I wanted to hear, now I'm on the other side of the table. I've been the advisor for a while. Tell me what your challenges were during that time. And one of the common themes about discovery, so understanding the go-to-market strategy, company, the business objectives, the business goals, the audience architecture, the customer needs, all of those things that we're trying to absorb quickly. One common theme was don't let things get in the way of that and really protect the time to spend the first 6 to 8 weeks doing that. And while I would agree with that, I'm here to tell you that in practice, that's really hard to do because every one of those conversations was really sucking you into that function or that executive's own personal agenda or issues or perceptions of where marketing should spend their time. So what I would say is really important about that discovery period is when you take the time to evaluate the things that you've been hearing throughout that discovery and trying to kind of prioritize the things that you think are foundational and priorities for short term versus midterm versus long term, is to think about it in the context of what you heard coming into the role. So all of us as CMOs, we're interviewing with CEOs, and we're asking questions to understand what will the CEO expect of marketing? What will success look like to you? And there's always an agenda, right? There's always a set of things that the CEO has in mind. What was interesting for me was going through that discovery and assessing the gap between the imperatives that the CEO delivered versus the reality of what was happening in the organization and the headwinds, if you will, that I would face to actually be able to achieve some of the things that I think the CEO thought might happen in a shorter period of time. So I think that is really important to do because coming out of that discovery, you really need to not just prioritize, but reset expectations and in a way that allows for progress early on some key things and then longer term milestones and objectives. Because regardless of how messy, for lack of a better word, things might be, or how many obstacles you might have, or things that need to be addressed before you can be successful, the executive team, the board, they're going to expect to see the needle moving pretty much from day one. So that gap and what it's going to take to close that gap between expectations and reality was really important for me during the first 60 days.
Yeah, imagine both of you guys are on the CMO hot seat. In a way, I envy you. In a way, I don't, because I know, to your point, the expectations, depending on who you're dealing with, can be all over the map, especially if you're dealing with marketers or non-marketers at the executive level or board level that have never had marketing experience, and they just expect everything is going to happen in a microwave minute, which is not necessarily the case. Maybe you could just spend a moment talking about your company as well. Now that we have that background, we see a trend of intent data being used in multiple companies or multiple intent providers, but you do a lot more than that. Maybe you could share a little bit about what Intensify does, and then how your role relates to that as well. I think it would be really great.
Yeah, I would be happy to. So, back to my comment about leaving my role as an advisor, there were a lot of opportunities out there, and I was really excited about this opportunity with Intensify because I think intent data and the use of B2B buyer intent is table stakes for all of us now. There are a lot of players in the market. It's not as mature. There's still lots of room to grow. People are using intent. When we look at we do our own survey, and we've seen that most B2B organizations are using 3 or more sources of intent. But when we ask a follow-on question about that, about whether or not they're actually getting value from that or leveraging it to its fullest extent, the vast majority will say, no. So what Intensify is doing is really unique in a number of ways. First of all, Intensifies, we call it our intelligence activation platform. Basically, that platform is orchestrating intent data. We have our own proprietary intent data, and we also can take in intent data from multiple sources. So we can play along with other intent data providers. If you've already invested in a 6sense or a demand base, or you've got any sources of intent coming in, the platform will actually layer that data, synthesize those signals. So just like any other type of data, the more the better, right? The more that you are able to corroborate, correlate those signals, the more precise you're getting. The other really exciting thing that we do, that we're the only provider doing today, is we are using our own proprietary intent derivation method. So if you think about the evolution of intent, it was, we've used keywords, been looking at keywords for a long time. Well, then we expanded keywords to business topics so we could understand the pains and the issues and the things people were searching for. We're still doing those things, but what we're doing at Intensify is also saying, okay, we're using the latest artificial intelligence and natural language processing technology, and we're looking at all of that intent activity, but we're also then marrying that with or correlating that to what your own company's value proposition, messaging around your products and solutions are, to be able to deliver an extra level of granularity to not only prioritize those that are showing the strongest intent and that are in market with the strongest intent, but actually taking that one step further and saying in market with the strongest intent and the closest match to exactly what you say your solutions offer. We also then are providing, full funnel intent activation solutions. So display advertising, content syndication. So you don't have to have the platform. We also manage those programs, those demand generation and brand awareness programs on behalf of our clients. So it's a really exciting space. And so I came in as Chief Marketing Officer to I mentioned earlier, fast growing, emerging growth organization, need to build the foundation for scale, which meant building out the marketing team, building out the processes to drive alignment across the functions, maturing everything from how we think about how we develop the business strategy, how we, how then that translates into the marketing strategy, evaluating our tech stack. What do we need to have in place? How are we going to achieve? How are we going to maintain the growth and achieve new growth targets? But what was also really interesting for me about this journey is coming into an organization that started out in a space that, the founders come from B2B marketing, tech target. They know how to go out and sell lead generation programs. And so that's what they did really successfully. And now we are on this journey I think people who have started using intent and in no intent data, they know that there are use cases full funnel for intent, not just the demand generation programs, but everything from validating your brand positioning and messaging, prioritizing accounts for sales, even after end of funnel, close business, you can use intent to prevent customer churn by monitoring what your customers are searching for. So it's really a full funnel intent activation story for us.
Jen, you have a question from Tom who's saying, just to clarify, is it a managed solution? I think I heard you say it's both, right?
Oh, it's both. Yes, we do a managed solution as well for those lead generation programs. So it is both. And we probably will always do an element of that. So it's not you have to purchase the platform to do that. And through the managed service, you are still getting access to the platform. So you see the data, you see what's happening in the platform, you're getting reports directly from the platform that are showing you the intent surges, how the signals are changing, how it's dynamically showing you how the intent is moving from early stage to mid stage to late stage, so that you can target the right messaging, the right creative at the right time.
Well, and I think the biggest question I hear from people and have struggled with myself is, how do you help your sales organization take advantage of the signals that are out there? What has been your work with your own sales organization to help them benefit from the cool things that you do?
It's a great question. And as you can imagine, the thing I hear every time I speak to my boss, our CEO, is, Jen, are we using our own intent data to show everything? So, we've all been in organizations that are guilty of, you're the last to drink your own champagne. And we all know that. In this case, coming in, that was actually one of my mandates. So when I said earlier, there's a set of things coming in that you're going to hear from your CEO that they expect. Number one for me was, we've got to be our own best customer success story. Like, how can we go out and tell you can accelerate the velocity of your pipeline using this proprietary intent if we're not doing it ourselves? So from day one, it has been looking at opportunities from, at every stage of the life cycle of how are we informing our decisions based on our intent. So everything we do, from working with sales to establish their target account list, is based on the intelligence that's coming out of the platform using the intent data. Every time we run any marketing program through any channel, we're going and rerunning, because the intent is changing all the time, the target account list and lookalikes for that target account list. So everyone that fits our ideal customer profile. And we're determining where we're going to place our investments and what we're going to do in terms of programs, whether it's awareness or it's more, hey, they look like they're looking, but maybe mid-stage solution focused, or hey, this one's really hot. And so we're using it at every step of the funnel, and we're using it for lead scoring. So the lead scoring factors in so we've kind of set up a schematic of what the intent scores, what that shows. So intent scores plus the activity we see from marketing efforts. So it's infused throughout everything that we do. It's still a journey for us. I mean, we are finding new ways to add value all the time. And we have the same struggles as every other company that's trying to drink their own champagne, because we're growing, we're also adding technology. So our tech stack is growing. It takes time to get all of those integrations in place, and we're in the midst of that right now. So one of the things that's priority for me, that Megan, this will be near and dear to your heart, is we are about to implement the latest version of the revenue waterfall. So, there's a lot of people listening to us that have some version of what was the original waterfall, or the re-architected, or the demand unit waterfall, or now what is the revenue waterfall. And for me, it's important to implement that latest view because it relies so heavily on intent data, because it's focused on opportunities at account level. So that's going to be really, really important for us, and really cool for us to be able to monitor and show our own audiences, hey, this is kind of what we're seeing. I mean, what we expect to see and what I hope to see is much better than benchmark averages in terms of movement through the funnel. So it's exciting. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of, as you know, these things don't happen overnight. And that's one of the other things I go back to about the core of our conversation here about, the first 90 to 100 days. There's another thing that I have found to be challenging. I talked about the fact that you've got to protect that time for discovery. But what you don't factor in when people say spend the time in discovery is that you've just inherited a team. And so you're doing in parallel a different type of discovery with the team. They have daily needs to help with decision making, prioritization. So you can't put that aside. They're thirsty for, hey, we've got a new leader here who's going to help us and guide us. And then you're trying to fill in the blanks on the strategy that you need to put into place over here. And what I have found is striking that balance between time spent with the relationship building with the rest of the leaders in the organization, which is so critical, and time spent with the team. That balance is really hard. And I'll be the first to raise my hand and say, time goes by so fast. I did find myself in a situation where I thought, oh my goodness, I started out with a really great cadence with our head of product. It's been 6 weeks now since we've had, had a one-on-one connection. We've got product enhancements and launches coming up. So it's really easy. And I'm not sure that I've cracked the code on how to do that. Other than to say it's been a challenge, and I try to make sure that I'm trying to manage the time in the calendar and allow equal time for both. But that is really, really challenging.
Yeah, you talk a lot about, and you make a really good point about the time management situation there of having to juggle everything. And in our experience in implementing a lot of this, either the waterfall or even though you're eating your own dog food with the intent data, it's change management that you're also, I would imagine, orchestrating. So in addition to building the relationship, you might be changing behaviors of maybe your BDRs or SDRs, and how they absorb this information or how they work to kind of absorb the changes that you want, the revenue architecture or that waterfall or intent data. So that could be a pretty heavy aspect, I imagine, as well.
It's a huge piece. One of the things I wrote about 2 years ago when I was in my role at Forrester was about the CMO cementing their role as a driver of growth. And in that, addressed 3 areas. One was that engineering alignment across the revenue engine team. Another was harnessing collective capabilities. So looking at the processes that not only drive the work within marketing, but with marketing's key stakeholders. But the third was being, John, just as you're talking about, that agent of change. And I will say, I'm not going to pretend that everybody that's listening to this conversation right now can do that easily. I'm lucky. I came into an organization where there was an appetite and a desire to learn from somebody who had been in marketing for many years, even though we were a very sales-led organization. The other executives were sales leaders, but very curious and willing to say, no, that's why you're here. We want you to help grow the bag. I'll never know as much about marketing, even if I study, as you do. Not everybody's in that same situation. So that change management, that difficult that is really does depend on that culture and that dynamic. So my advice would be, you can't change that, but what you can do is spend that time early on in that first 90 days really assessing that level of maturity of the organization so that you can adapt your own style, language. How much do they know about how can you start throwing out B2B marketing terminology that you've been using for the last few years? Are people just going to go, I don't know what she's talking about? Or are you in an organization that's a little bit more mature? That's a really important thing that connects back to the building the relationships with the other executives, because otherwise you can start talking about things that seem like common day-to-day things for you as a marketer and can sound really complicated to other members of the executive team who start thinking, ooh, what she's talking about sounds really complex and it feels like it's going to take a long time, and do we really need it? And oh, the more complex it sounds, for some reason people seem to associate dollar signs with that too. That sounds complex. How much is it going to cost us? How fast can we get that done? So that was another key component, I think, that all of us in these roles face coming into either as a first-time CMO or coming in as a CMO into a new organization, is finding that way to communicate and educate in a way that doesn't sound overwhelming, and then to set expectations and establish milestones that are digestible and reasonable.
Couldn't agree more. That's been a learning opportunity for me too. One of the things that we promised we'd cover today, and I know we only have a couple minutes left, but I want to make sure we get there, or at least sort of scratch the surface of it, is this concept of the myth of digital fatigue. I think many of us see varying rates of success with some of the activities that worked very well over the last couple of years, and maybe they will or they won't continue into the next couple. But Jen, I'd love your perspective on, is digital fatigue real, or is it, something that we want to use as an excuse, and what can we do about it?
It's a great question, and I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to participate earlier in the fall in a panel on this topic with some colleagues from On24 and Dell, and we all were in unanimous agreement that digital fatigue is real. Here's the problem. Digital fatigue, really by definition, is fatigue from time in front of a screen. So and the term digital fatigue, though, is now being adopted by marketers. And I won't say they're using it as an excuse. Let's just say they're calling everything digital fatigue. Something doesn't perform as well, there's digital fatigue. So yes, time in front of a screen and fatigue from that is real. What I think marketers are doing, though, is maybe over rotating or overusing that digital fatigue when they really should be, your buyers, they don't indicate that there's digital fatigue in terms of them going online to do the research that they need to do to make a decision about a purchase. If we look at other studies or other data coming in around that, it's like, no, they're still doing those things. I think the difference is there's so much more noise because everything the wealth of information at their fingertips, that it becomes really important to find the right ways to break through that noise. And the only way to break through that noise is to be sure that you really understand your buyers and your buyers' needs, and that you're messaging them with the right things at the right time. Kind of goes back to what we were saying about the importance of how intent is becoming table stakes, because you can no longer afford as a marketer the broad reach, the old spray and pray. Hopefully not too many people still doing that, but it's just becoming increasingly more and more and more and more important to narrow your focus on the right people who are in market at the right time. But I wouldn't say that our buyers are doing any less online because they've got digital fatigue. I think they're a lot less likely to now attend a webinar or something like that, where in the past they might have thought, that sounds kind of interesting. Now they're really like, no, I only have the time for the thing that's like really speaking to me.
Yeah, and just thinking about, gosh, time, we're actually at time right now. I think we could spend another 30 minutes at least talking with you on a bunch of different topics related to intent. And almost going back to what you were previously saying about the simplification, I am guilty as charged. I have done that very thing of talking in marketing speak and not realizing on the other side of the table how important it is to translate and use their words as opposed to the proprietary language that we've become accustomed to. So I think you make an excellent point on that. I don't even go one step further, even with your intent solution or however you're presenting that to your sales team, that too has to be pretty mindful about how you're simplifying things in terms of their workflow and their communication. Otherwise, the risk is you overwhelm people. And to your point, they put dollar signs and complexity when somebody gets overwhelmed and they don't understand it. It's easy to kind of back away and not necessarily rise up to the occasion of learning it. So yeah, I think you make an excellent point on that. Just keeping an eye on time here. I don't. Any closing thoughts, Jen, on our conversation today, or Megan?
Yeah, I mean, my closing thought on we talked about a couple of different really interesting topics. You're right. And I would love to come back anytime and
Please
talk
do.
digital, talk intent, but so as a CMO and on the role in the first 90 days, quick piece of advice, just remember, I try to take everything and filter it through the lens of, I'm going to do my prioritization based on how we're going to add value to our customer or deliver increasing value to our customer. Easiest way to start to try to think about, I'm going to do this and not do this, and here's why. On the digital, quick tip and piece of advice is more surgical focus and precise focus on what your buyer needs, and getting the insights and the information about where they're going for that, and be willing to experiment, and be open to experimentation and innovation.
Love it. Well, and thank you very, very much. I know I've taken a few things away from this that have validated some of my own experiences, but also are challenging me to think a little bit differently. So I appreciate that, Jennifer. And that's, I think, something that you've always been able to do for B2B leaders. So I thank you for joining us today and for sharing your lessons and insights with our community. And yeah, we'd love for you to come back another time.
Yeah.
Awesome. And with that, I think we'll wrap. Jennifer, thanks for investing the time. Next week, we're still on the theme of intent data. Next week, we've got Kate Atmer, recently the head of growth marketing for Bombora. Now she's at Open Sesame. She'll be sharing some of her insights around what's working in this growth environment, which is a pretty challenging environment right now. So really looking forward to that conversation.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, John. Happy Friday.
Yeah, have a great weekend.